I still remember the exact moment the metal door slammed shut above my head. The sound echoed through the walls like a final verdict, sharp and unforgiving. For a second, I stood frozen on the last step of the wooden staircase, staring into the darkness of the basement, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The cold air wrapped around me as if the room itself had been waiting for me, ready to swallow me whole. Our house in Richmond, Virginia, was a gray two-story building with white shutters and a garden that looked perfect from the outside. People passing by probably thought a happy family lived inside. They would never imagine that behind those neat walls, I was being locked away like a prisoner. My step-parents, Martha and Philip, stood on the other side of the door, their shadows spilling across the thin strip of light that seeped through the bottom. Martha's voice came first, sharp and cutting. "You will remain down there until you agree to marry him." She said it like she was reading a simple rule from a book, as if what she demanded was normal. Philip added, "A man like him doesn't come around often. You should be grateful." Then the lock clicked, sealing me in. My heart twisted at the sound. I stumbled backward until my shoulder hit a cement wall. The basement was quiet except for the hum of an old refrigerator that barely worked. The space smelled like damp wood, dust, and the faint scent of motor oil. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking in my chest, but the cold seeped into my bones. They wanted me to marry a man from Europe, someone almost twice my age, a businessman who claimed he could fix my life. The entire idea made my stomach tighten. I had said no politely at first, then firmly, then angrily. But my refusal only made Martha's face twist with fury. The hours dragged slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. I sat on the cement floor with my back against an old wooden table. My legs ached. My throat burned from crying. I called out for help once, banging on the door, but no one answered. I think they left the house on purpose so they wouldn't have to hear me. That hurt even more. By the second day, hunger gnawed at my stomach in sharp waves. I found a small bottle of water left behind from last week when Philip cleaned the basement. I rationed it in little sips. I forced myself not to drink it all at once. Every hour, I waited for the sound of the lock turning, but it never came. I curled up on an old box full of winter coats and tried to sleep, but the cold made my fingers stiff and numb. My body shivered in tiny, uncontrollable bursts. On the third day, my voice felt raw from calling out. My head throbbed. My legs were weak. I sat in the corner near the stairs and counted the wooden steps again and again, as if a number would bring me hope. I kept whispering to myself, "Someone will come. Someone will find me." But each time I said those words, a part of me wondered if it was a lie. It wasn't just hunger or fear that hurt me. It was the betrayal. These two people had raised me since I was a child. They had clothed me, fed me, and put me in school. I never imagined they would lock me in a basement because I didn't want to marry someone they chose. I had always known they were controlling, but I never knew they were dangerous. By late evening, when the sun outside had dropped low enough to cast a weak line of light through the small rectangular basement window, I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled, but I walked toward a stack of boxes in the far corner. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I think my mind just needed something to focus on, something to keep me from breaking apart. I pushed aside an old crate filled with broken picture frames. Another box held books covered in dust. Then, halfway buried under a pile of holiday decorations, I saw something small and familiar, a mobile phone. The back cover was missing, and the screen was badly cracked across the center. I remembered this phone. I had dropped it a year ago while running in the rain. It never turned on again, or so I thought. I picked it up with shaking hands. My heart beat faster than it had in 3 days. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again, harder this time. The screen flickered faintly, like a dying candle. I held my breath. After a few seconds, the faintest glow spread across the display. I almost cried from relief. With my thumb trembling, I typed 911. My fingers slipped twice before I got the numbers right. I pressed the call button and held the phone close to my ear, praying the signal would reach through the thick walls. A faint ring. Another. Then a voice. But it wasn't the calm, trained voice of a dispatcher. It wasn't the police at all. It was a deep voice I didn't recognize. It spoke my name. Not my full name. My childhood nickname, a name I hadn't heard since I was too young to remember clearly. My breath caught in my throat. My hands froze around the phone. The man on the line said, in a voice that shook with emotion, "Do not be afraid. I know who you are." Before I could speak, before I could even process the shock building in my chest, the voice continued. "I have been looking for you for 22 years. You are my daughter." And just like that, everything inside me shattered and shifted at once. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen in the dim basement, holding the cracked phone as if it were the only thing keeping me alive. The voice had sounded so sure, so familiar in a way I couldn't explain. My childhood nickname, the one locked deep in my memory, echoed through my mind like a distant song. I hadn't heard it since I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, before my memories blurred into shadows. How could a stranger know that name? How could he call me with such certainty, such heartbreak in his voice? Then the reality crashed over me, sharp and heavy. The phone screen flickered once, then died completely. The battery, already weak, had finally given out. The basement went silent again, so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I whispered, "No, no, no," shaking the phone as if that would bring it back to life. But it stayed dark. The only proof of that voice, that impossible moment, lay in my memory. And doubt rushed in quickly. Had I imagined the whole thing? Hunger and fear could twist anyone's mind, right? Maybe the voice wasn't real. Maybe my brain had invented hope because I had none left. But the way he said my nickname, the exact tone, the way it rolled from his tongue like he had whispered it 1,000 times before, no hallucination could create something that real. I sank to the floor, the cement cold against my legs. My fingers still curled around the phone, as if letting go would erase the moment. My breathing came in short, tight bursts. He said he had been searching for me for 22 years. He said he recognized my voice. And most terrifying of all, he said I was his daughter. The words clung to me like a second skin. Daughter. A word Martha and Philip never used. They introduced me as our girl, or the one we adopted, or simply by my name. Their love had always felt conditional, but I never understood why until that voice revealed everything in one breath. Kidnapped as a child. Stolen from my real family. Sold to them for $10,000. It sounded like the plot of a movie, not the truth of my life. And yet, something in my bones said it was real. Something deep inside me recognized the voice even if my conscious mind didn't. I pressed the dead phone against my forehead and tried to slow my breathing. If what he said was true, then my entire life had been built on a lie. One created to keep me trapped. My stepparents had never been rescuers. They had been buyers. And the man on the phone had never stopped searching for me. My body trembled with a mix of fear and something else. Something warm. Something almost like hope. Still sitting on the floor, I closed my eyes and tried to remember anything that might connect me to him. A room. A smell. A face. But all I found were flashes. A man with short hair lifting me into the air. Sunlight hitting a backyard fence. A woman's soft laugh. The sound of a piano playing in the background. They were tiny pieces of a puzzle I had buried years ago without knowing I had buried it. A sudden noise from upstairs made me jump. Footsteps. Slow at first, then heavier. They weren't Martha's light steps or Philip's dragging ones. These were firm and purposeful. Something in my chest tightened. What if they heard my call? What if they thought I tried to escape? Panic fluttered through me like trapped birds. But then the footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Nothing happened. Minutes passed with no movement. I tried to breathe through the tension, forcing myself to stay quiet in case they were listening. My thoughts circled back to the man on the phone.
"Colonel James Walker," he said.
An Army officer stationed in Colorado. He had spent almost $500,000 searching for me, following rumors, hiring investigators, chasing anything that indicated I was still alive. Who does that for decades unless the missing person means everything to them? Unless I meant everything to him? Tears slipped down my cheeks, slow and surprising. Not from fear this time, but from a strange, aching sense of belonging that I had never known. If he were truly my father, then somewhere in Colorado there was a house that once held my toys, my clothes, my baby photos. Somewhere there was a room that once belonged to me. Somewhere there was a man who never stopped fighting to bring me home. I lifted my head, imagining what he looked like now. Older, maybe, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes from worry more than age. A uniform that carried years of weight. And still, after all the time and all the dead ends, he had answered a random call from a broken phone in a basement in Virginia. That wasn't an accident. That was fate clawing its way back to me. Suddenly, the fear that had drowned me for 3 days loosened its grip. My fingers curled tighter around the dead phone. I whispered, "You're coming for me," even though I didn't know how he would. But the certainty settled in my chest like a warm ember. He had found me once. He would find me again. I stood slowly, bracing myself on the wall. Even the act of standing made my knees shake. I walked toward the small window, the only connection to the world outside. A thin beam of moonlight slipped through the glass, dust dancing in it. I placed my hand against the window frame and watched the dark sky. For the first time since being locked in the basement, I didn't feel completely alone. Somewhere out there, he was moving, calling, searching, maybe even driving. I didn't know how and I didn't know when, but I knew one thing. He was coming. And when he arrived, everything, every lie, every wound, every secret, would finally break open. I don't know exactly how long I stood by that tiny window, staring at the moonlight and clinging to the echo of that voice, but time felt strange, stretched, warped, melted into something weightless. My legs trembled, my throat burned, and my stomach clawed at itself with hunger, yet somehow, hope held me upright. I knew he would come. I didn't know when or how, but I felt it like a pulse in my chest. When it finally happened, it happened fast. It started with the sudden roar of tires cutting across gravel outside. Harsh, loud, unmistakable. For 3 days, the world had been silent except for my own heartbeat. Now there were engines, heavy footsteps, and car doors slamming. My breath hitched. I stepped back from the window, listening. The boots hit the driveway with force, purposeful and sure. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I heard a voice, deep, commanding, filled with a kind of fury that only comes from love or war. "Where is my daughter?" My whole body froze. That was his voice. The same voice from the phone. The man who claimed to be my father. The man who had searched for me for more than 2 decades. The man whose grief had shaped his entire life. Hearing him like this, not broken, not desperate, but powerful, sent a shock through me. It didn't matter that I had never seen him. Somehow, in that moment, he felt more real than anyone I had ever known. "Upstairs," Martha screamed. It was a sharp, panicked sound, nothing like the confident voice she'd used when locking me away. Philip shouted something incoherent, his words tripping over his fear. Then came the heavy thud of someone slamming into the door above me. Dust drifted from the ceiling like gray snow. The wooden beams trembled. My breath grew shallow. Another strike. A cracking noise. A muffled shout I couldn't make out. I stepped backward until I pressed against an old metal shelf filled with tools and old paint cans. My hands shook. My mind raced. Part of me still couldn't believe this was real. I kept waiting to wake up in the darkness, alone again. But the chaos above me was unmistakable. Something was happening. Someone was fighting for me. Then came the hit that changed everything. A massive crash shook the entire basement. Wood splintered. The lock snapped. The door at the top of the stairs flew open, slamming against the wall. Light burst down the staircase in a wide beam, cutting through the darkness that had held me for days. Footsteps pounded down the stairs, fast, heavy, determined. A tall man in a dark army jacket appeared, his silhouette blocking the light for a moment before he stepped into full view. His chest rose and fell with rage and fear and something deeper, something almost tender. His eyes scanned the basement, racing over boxes, walls, and shelves until they landed on me. And everything inside him softened. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could. My legs trembled, my throat tightened, and my vision blurred with sudden tears. He stepped forward quickly, but not harshly, as if he were afraid I might disappear if he moved too fast. When he finally reached me, he didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around me and held me so tight I could feel the trembling in his hands. The warmth of his embrace shattered something inside me. For the first time in my life, safety didn't feel like an idea or a dream. It felt like a person. Like him. He whispered into my hair, voice shaking. "I'm here now. They will never hurt you again." Tears slid down my cheeks, soaking into his jacket. My hands clutched the fabric on his back, not wanting to let go. I didn't know what to call him. I didn't know how to speak. I could barely breathe. But the moment he held me, I knew, without a single doubt, that everything he had said was real. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He was my father. Behind him, the basement filled with noise, voices, footsteps, commands being shouted. Soldiers moved through the house with controlled precision, their boots thudding on the old wood floors. They moved through the rooms like a wave, clearing space, breaking down resistance. Martha screamed again, sharper this time. Philip cursed and begged in the same breath. The sound of handcuffs clicked, quick and final. My father didn't let go of me, not even for a second. His hand cupped the back of my head, his palm warm and steady. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask 100 questions. How did you find me? How did you know I was here? Why now? Why tonight? But the words tangled in my throat. The exhaustion of the past days pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating, while relief lifted me at the same time. My father pulled back just enough to look at my face. His eyes, sharp and strong, glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You look just like her," he whispered. Her. My mother. A woman I barely remembered. Before I could ask anything, he slipped an arm under my knees and lifted me gently. I leaned against him, too weak to stand on my own. He carried me up the stairs as if I weighed nothing. As we reached the main floor, I saw the house through a new lens, the overturned chairs, the shattered vase, the soldiers standing guard, Martha and Philip pressed against the wall in handcuffs, their faces pale and furious. Martha glared at me with venom in her eyes, but my father stepped in front of me, shielding me completely.
He didn't even look at them.
Instead, he whispered, "Let's go home." Home. A word I hadn't felt in years. As he carried me out of the house, past the flashing lights and the soldiers who stepped aside with silent respect, I realized something with a swell of emotion. My real life wasn't beginning downstairs, in that cold basement. It was beginning right here in my father's arms, walking into the night air for the first time in years as something I had never expected to be again.
Free.
The days following my rescue felt unreal, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life and was still waiting to be asked to leave. The policemen who accompanied us out of the house spoke gently, their faces soft with concern. My father never let go of my hand, not even when paramedics asked to check me for injuries. He kept his body close to mine, protective in a way no one had ever been toward me. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone truly saw me, not as a burden, an object, or a tool for their control, but as someone precious. We left Richmond that same night. My father took me to a small medical base outside the city, where I was treated, fed, and wrapped in warm blankets. Every time someone entered the room, his eyes followed them, measuring their intentions, scanning for danger. He didn't sleep. I watched him sit in a corner chair, elbows on his knees, head bowed as if he were silently thanking every power he believed in for bringing me back. When the doctor finally permitted him to take me home, he arranged a private flight straight to Colorado. I had never been on a private plane before. I sat beside the window, wrapped in a soft military-issued jacket he gave me, watching the lights of the East Coast fade beneath us. My father sat beside me and held my hand the entire flight. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't, but every moment felt like healing. He told me stories of my childhood, the way I used to laugh when he lifted me onto his shoulders, the songs my mother used to sing while brushing my hair, the little garden behind our old Denver house where I once chased butterflies with a tiny yellow net. I listened in silence, feeling pieces of myself slot back into place like a puzzle that had been scattered for years. When we landed, I stepped onto Colorado's soil with a strange mix of fear and wonder. The air felt different, cold but clean, sharp but comforting. My father drove us to his house, a warm brick home with soft porch lights and a tall oak tree standing guard at the front. It was worth nearly $800,000 now, but to him, no price could measure its importance. It was the place he had kept alive for me, the place he refused to change because he believed one day, somehow, I would return. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine wood and something sweet, maybe vanilla. The living room was cozy, with soft brown furniture, framed photos on the fireplace, and a large window overlooking the backyard. But nothing prepared me for the moment he opened the door to my room. It was painted a soft, gentle yellow. A small bookshelf stood in the corner, lined with children's books, fairy tales, and picture books from decades ago. A music box rested on the nightstand beside a lamp shaped like a star. A tiny wooden rocking horse sat near the window. Everything looked untouched, perfectly preserved, like a time capsule waiting to be opened by the little girl who should have grown up here. I felt my legs weaken. My throat tightened. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. I stepped inside slowly, touching the edge of the bookshelf, tracing my fingers along the music box. When I opened it, a soft melody drifted out, a tune I didn't consciously recognize, but my heart did. Something deep inside me stirred, and the tears finally spilled over. My father stepped beside me and gently took my hand. "You were never forgotten," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "Not for a single day." I turned to him and saw more emotion in his eyes than I thought a man like him, a decorated officer, a leader, a fighter, could ever show. But grief and love lived in those eyes together. He wasn't just my rescuer. He was the father who had lived through 22 years of loss, refusing to accept a world where I no longer existed. In the months that followed, life became a slow reconstruction, not the building of something new, but the rebuilding of what was stolen. I started therapy twice a week, learned how to sleep through the night without waking from nightmares, and slowly untied the knots trauma had wrapped around my heart. There were hard days, days when I couldn't leave my bed, days when memories collided with reality until everything blurred. But my father was always there, morning, night, and every moment in between. He introduced me to his closest friends, people who had known me as a baby, people who cried when they saw me grown and alive. They told me stories, shared memories, and never pushed me to remember things I couldn't. Instead, they let me find myself at my own pace. My father also worked with lawyers and investigators to make sure Martha and Philip faced justice. When the day came to file charges, he stood beside me in the courthouse, his hand on my shoulder, his presence strong and unshakable. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. They no longer held my past. I finally had a future. As the seasons changed, I found myself growing stronger. I learned to cook with my father. I helped plant flowers in the backyard. I found my voice again, not the scared, shrinking voice my stepparents had shaped, but the steady, brave voice I was born with. And every night, when I lay in my real room with the music box on my nightstand, I thought about the moment everything changed, the moment a broken, dying phone connected me to the one man who had never stopped loving me. The man who broke down a door for me. The man who never gave up. The moment I finally learned who I truly was. And the moment I stepped into the life I should have had all along.